Welcome to my review of Batman the video game for Genesis. And you can set your lives up to 7, which is pretty generous. This game took me about 2 hours and 6 minutes to beat. Really not a very hard game. Quite a bit easier than the NES game, since there's really no parts that are as hard as the end of the NES game. Even the NES game really isn't too hard till you get to the last level. But this one, as you can see, you can pull some bullshit with jumping through some of the stages. Like the first stage, I pretty much skip everything. And I have a tutorial up, so you can see some of the exploits that I found and things like that to make the game easier, and strategies I used. I will post a link to that tutorial. Has full commentary, breaks everything down that I did. I by no means mastered the game, but this is what I learned in 2 hours and 6 minutes that it took for me to beat. So you have your stages, and then you have boss fights at the end of most of the stages, as you would expect. And you have a few different weapons. This is made by Sunsoft, which also made the NES one. So the soundtrack is some of the best soundtrack on the Genesis. It's extremely good. But the game, it's definitely not of the quality of that NES game, but it's quite a good game. It's very solid. But a lot of the bosses have simple patterns, as you can see there with that first boss. Now the stages do get a little bit more complex. Here we got some platforms, and you got to dodge some, falling chandeliers and things like that. You do have ranged weapons like the batarangs if you want to use them, but a lot of times I don't really bother with them on the normal enemies. I kind of save them for a lot of the bosses, I think. You can pick up a 1-up every so often, as you see there. But yeah, you can earn a lot of 1-ups in this game, and you do have limited continues and limited lives, so you do have to learn the game. But it didn't take me long. I used save and load states to practice specific parts that I thought might give me trouble later. So, of course, that always speeds up my completion of these games because I'm pretty proficient at save state practice and putting these games together legit. So, as you can see, you have your bosses. And like I said, a lot of the bosses are pretty simple once you know when to hit them. It's usually a certain time when you want to get your hit in. The patterns are not complicated at all. The NES definitely had better designed bosses for the NES version. As you can see, these are pretty simple. I mean, a lot of them you can take no damage if you learn their simple little patterns that they have. What is cool, though, there is a nice mix. Like here you have driving stages, which play totally differently, which is very cool. And you also have Batwing stages where it's like a spaceship shooter style, which is also cool. Now, these stages are a little bit clunkier than your typical spaceship shooter. You know what I mean? They're not like super tight like that, but they play well enough, and they're a fun diversion from the main gameplay. And most of the stages, while you can jump through and kind of skip through enemies, it's harder to do that on some of the other stages because you have a lot of platforming and stuff to deal with. But the game, you do respawn where you die unless you lose, I think, a continue. Then you may have to start the stage over. But I don't remember exactly. I think that's how it works. And you only have a few continues. But I wouldn't say it's the tightest gameplay. I mean, sometimes it does feel like you're kind of trading hits, or it could be a little sloppy. But it's pretty well put together. But it doesn't feel as tight to me as the NES one did. You also have a grapple hook, so you can grapple up to areas. But there are some tedious and annoying type of areas. I think I showed some footage of the final stage where you will see that. But here you can see this is the spaceship shooter style stage, with the Batwing, and it's kind of fun. But like I said, it is a little clunky. You got a big hitbox with this thing, so it is easy to get hit. But they're not too challenging, so it's not like frustrating. It's just not top tier shooter gameplay, but it's good enough. So again, you see these simple patterns where you kind of come down, hit the boss, and all the bosses are kind of like this with these simple patterns and simple openings for the most part. Also, you see that the bosses are being recycled here. This is the final boss gauntlet of the game where you fight pretty much all the bosses over again. And I edited this down just to show you fighting all the bosses again. These are all guys that you fought earlier in the game. I don't think there's any unique bosses here, if I remember right. I think it's all just recycled. You have to go through several of these guys in a row, and there's some enemies in between to break it up. You may get some health back. I'm not sure. I don't remember 100%, but I will show you all that in the tutorial if you're interested. I break everything down. But it was probably over a year or a few years when I beat this, so it's a little hazy. So most of these bosses, like I said, very simple. I don't think I had this guy down too well, but I think it's a pretty simple, pattern. So now you see it. Once you get the loop, these guys are usually pretty easy. So yeah, you're going to fight all these bosses again, of course, for the final boss gauntlet. And then you will, after you beat all these guys again, you will end up on the final stage, which is a kind of a tower climb. And it's, I consider it to be kind of shitty game design, kind of a pain in the ass in a bad way. I mean, like I said, I love challenges and shit, especially brutal games. I mean, I'm into that. But I did feel like this was kind of sloppy. Because, this game doesn't have the tightest control and hits and everything like that, at least to me. Now, of course, you could practice it and master it, obviously. But you can do that with the shittiest games. It doesn't, just because you can master something doesn't mean it's well designed. But I'm not saying this is shitty or anything. But I did feel like this part, it feels a little sloppy. There's a lot of bombs and cheap bullshit that hits you off screen. And it's kind of a bit of a memorization type of thing, obviously. I mean, like I said, a lot of games are like that. But it's a little bit more tedious than it should be, I think. I mean, the NES Batman was challenging, but in a much more, tighter control and better design type of way. So I would prefer the NES game pretty much in every way above this game. But I think this is really worth experiencing. If you enjoyed the NES one, this is quite a bit different in the way it plays. But you'll probably enjoy another Batman side-scrolling action game with some great music and some pretty cool gameplay. It's solid gameplay. It's not going to blow your balls off or anything, but it's pretty solid. Joker is kind of, a bit cheap as you would expect. He kind of just feels like you exchange blows with him until one of you dies. But you'll probably have a few lives, so you don't even have to... If you die, you can just respawn. Just don't lose a continue on him, because then you might have to redo that whole tower again. But the tower is not really super long. It's just kind of tedious and bullshitty. You can get knocked down a lot and have to reclimb, from what I remember, and it's just kind of irritating. And, like I said, there's good challenge, and then there's kind of just shitty where you get hit off screen because, the screen doesn't show everything. As you scroll the screen up, you get hit by bullshit, and you get knocked back down. And then you gotta do some weird timings with the flames that the dragons spit out and the enemies throwing dynamite. It's just kind of irritating. It just doesn't feel well designed. It feels like more of a fuck fest. I'm not saying it's super hard or anything. You can practice it with save states and learn it pretty easy, but I'm sure for some players it's going to be a bitch. But it didn't give me too much trouble, but I just felt like, it was irritating when I got knocked down, and it just felt like for no good reason because of shit I couldn't see off screen. But overall, I think this is a solid game and a very solid action game on the Genesis, and I would give this a 7 out of 10. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.